Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Mound Series, The Misunderstanding of Multiplicity. My name is Maria. Welcome to my channel. So on this channel, I talk about the misconceptions, the misunderstanding, the legend, the myths that accompany multiple personality, what it used to be called, is now called dissociative identity disorder, DID. Over the years, I've been talking quite a bit about method acting and how there is this pervasive thought that either a therapist created multiple personality or the movie Sybil really made it increase. I have also been talking about false memory association and how there are some therapists and lay people and news people and people all over the place that think that doctors lead their clients, patients, participants, whatever, into false memories and into creating multiple personality. Okay, so there's camps I've talked about. There's camps that believe, there's people that believe that multiple personality was made by doctors or made by the patient, client, participant in their therapy. Over and over again, the question has been, is the client, patient, suggestive, led, malingering, hysterical, which is what it used to be called, hysteria, or is it being learned as a system of behavior, a learned response from therapy? Iatrogenically, they are learning to behave in a manner and assign the meaning to personas, aspects, alter egos. Okay. I believe it's a little bit of both. In therapy, what we do is we go to therapy when we finally have to reach out for help to somebody. We don't know what's going on. It could be panic attacks, could be insomnia, could be our life blowing up, could be just this gnawing depression that comes and goes, or it could be a million things. Okay, we reach out. Usually a therapist is going to ask you, what brings you here? They might already have a note. Somebody may have written a note if you ended up in a hospital, if a family member called, if there was an intake done by a receptionist or something. You might have a little note like client is having trouble with eating, or client is having trouble with sleeping, or client has goals, job opportunities, or client is unhappy with their work, or maybe they got referred from their work as a behavior, right? So there's many ways you can end up in a therapeutic setting: through a court mandated counseling, through a primary care doctor, a gynecologist, a pediatrician. Say, I think you could do well with therapy. When people end up in a medical doctor's office for too long with complaints that there's no explanation for, and they really are running all the tests and doing everything, a lot of times they'll start looking at stress and trauma, early trauma from a child, that could be causing aches and pains in your body that you just aren't connecting with past wounds. So in Sally's case, she at the same time had an idyllic childhood, was very aware of the woman in her family. And I could relate to this because I grew up with my mom and my grandma in the same home. And they were totally different than when the men came home, or even when my brother came home. If my uncles were stopping over, my grandmother was totally different. So was my mother. If the whole family was coming over, my mother and my grandmother were different. When my brother came home, different. But when I was just a fly on the wall looking at my mom and my grandma, I really learned a lot of what went into their generational cycle that caused them my grandmother to overeat, my mother to undereat, and it just went back and forth. Their constant kerfuddling over who was going to cook, who was going to be the mother, who was in charge, whose house was it, who was gardening, who was doing the laundry, just crazy stuff that's just everyday chore stuff that you would think you could just say, okay, we could all do it together. But my grandmother was the matriarch. She owned that kitchen. And I mean, you didn't put your hand on the refrigerator to open it unless she knew what you were going in for. This was my mom's mom. So my mom never felt like she could actually mother my brother and I really without my grandmother stepping in. And my grandmother had to step in because my mother was sick and take care of us kids. And even when my mom and dad were together, my grandmother had to step into that role of taking care of us kids in the house. So there was a short time period where my mom was very independent and doing great at mothering and being a wife and a housewife, and even being a worker, like working outside of the house, coming home, the whole bit. But she always gravitated back towards her mother. And I remember a few years before my grandmother died, it was the first time, it took me leaving that home very prematurely. And the home was no longer needed really for them. And that was their breaking of the apron strings for them. And my grandmother finally had her own apartment, and my mother her own apartment, and they could live life separately. Because my brother was old enough he was off at college, and so I knew in my heart. I went to a school social worker all the time, and I would say, I know I need to leave that house because my mother needs to be alone. My grandmother needs to be alone. And they're only together because of my brother and me. But my brother's going to be leaving, and there's no sense for me to be there. And this book really talks about how Sally, her aunts, her grandma, her mom, they all kind of had this codependency, enabling and caring for one another right up to that they were tied to each other. And so she learned a lot from the women in her life, so I could relate to that a lot. Now, interestingly, Sally Field believes that the role of Sybil is the most important role she ever played, and that it was a true story, and that she still believes this to this day, and that still doctors are showing students of psychiatry the movie Sybil in case they don't know it, so they understand it, which is sad to me. It's very sad to me that a woman that is so intelligent, and you can tell by her writing this, she is a very intelligent woman. She's a deep thinker. That she actually believes that Sybil was a profound, pioneering work that helped move psychiatry forward and helped so many women. It didn't. It made things worse. It made a lot of stigma for people. Okay. Never the mind. We know about what the movie Sybil has done, and we know the true story of Shirley Ardell Mason. Now we know that there weren't really other names, sexes, ages. There were a bunch of younger Shirley Ardell Masons. But for the book and for the movie, they fleshed out those characters and gave them names and applied roles and ages. And sex and culture and all that. Okay. Um, After watching the Oscars and seeing how quickly Will Smith went into non-accountability during his speech and talking about how, just like the crazy dad Richard Williams was, the role he was winning the Oscar for, Vanessa and Serena Williams' dad, the fiercely protective and defending uh, how a person that he was of his family, how he could have he took that on, that that characteristic, that he was being called to that. I'm going to talk more about that later, but I've been talking for years how with method acting, a lot of um, Hollywood actors um, that later have these meltdowns and behaviors that people are applying to episodes, and psychotic behavior and mental illness, and even saying maybe they got DID or this or that. No, no, no. They have not um, shed parts of the character that they went too deep into. They haven't been able to give up some of the, I want to say, more serious tones of a character. That could be said for Heath Ledger. Said a lot of people believe that he went to a really dark place to play the Joker in Batman. So, I mean, no, I don't even want to, that's too involved. But as children, we imitate. We're sponges. We have big ears. We listen to what goes around, and we learn what's acceptable and what's not by storytelling, by the adults in our family that we consider reliable and valid, by what the other adults consider valid. So if you're a non-validated person at your dinner table, you're usually the scapegoat or the crazy one. All right. So I've said before, I really got into group dynamics, and this was one of the reasons. I could see how just sitting in a different spot at the dining room table changed the dynamics of the conversation, or how a person walking in the room changed the whole energy level, and everybody uh, switched up conversation. And it wasn't because somebody was talking about you, it was because um, maybe they knew you might you might confront what they were saying, you might challenge what they were saying, maybe whatever the reason. Um, Group dynamics has always been interesting to me. And I like that Sally Field touches on that in how every cast and crew that she worked with, um, the dynamics changed depending on who was on set and doing their lines and working their scenes. Um, the women in her life were very important to her. The men in her life were very important. At a very young age, her mom got divorced. By 4 years old, her mom remarried and married a stuntman who was very popular in Hollywood, very well respected. And she knew instinctively from the first time she met him at 4 years old that he was dangerous, but he was everything. He gave her the attention she was craving. She felt special, and he was all consuming, all about Sally. And when her mom was gone, he encouraged her to be free, and she wanted to please him. She talks about the very confusing aspects of incest or trying to get an older male in your family's attention and feeling guilty about it, but also feeling good for the attention it gave you. So her step, and she also talks about feeling like the other woman, the mistress, the wife, the bad girl, the good girl, the one with the secret, the one with special information that couldn't be shared with her mom because her mom was too fragile, through the marriage. But then her mom divorced, and Sally and her mom stayed close right to the end of her life. She talks about her marriage. She talks about her relationship with Burt Reynolds. She talks about all the roles she had to fight for. Mary Todd Lincoln was one of the ones she really fought for. Steven Spielberg had actually told her about the script and said he had her in mind to play it. Then last minute, he didn't think it was a good idea. She fought for it. Norma Ray, same thing. So, and then how she felt Burt Reynolds was a, a kind of her working out her feelings for her stepfather, where he was a dangerous kind of love. So Burt Reynolds was never going to be the one. He was a dangerous love. He was a negative love. And she knew exactly what she was to him, and she was working out her abuse issues the whole time she went out with Burt Reynolds. But it wasn't until her mother was dying and they had said all the words. She wasn't quite sure if she had articulated enough just how badly different things affected her in life, being Gidget, Flying Nun, Norma Ray, Sybil, all that went on with Hollywood having to show her breasts before she could get a part, having to allegedly show her breasts before she could get a part, although I believe that's true, having to kiss a producer, although the producer says, director says that never happened. These are allegations. So people have asked in an interview, did you wait till everybody died to make these allegations? And she, at first I thought she's protesting a bit too much. She, no, 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 no. But when you read the book, you understand that this was the normal way it was back in the day. And nobody thought anything of it. Nobody thought it was weird. But when her mom was dying, she realized she was falling apart. Like she felt like she was scattered from a young girl even before she became an actress. She felt like from 4, 5, actually 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. She felt like she was all over the place. Like she was being everything she needed to fit in. She even wondered if she was autistic because she was doing what she thought she understood to be masking, where people with autism will imitate everything. And she had the ability to watch a character on TV and totally hit it perfectly. The character, the whole thing. Even if it was overly done, she got it. And so she began to wonder, am I just fitting in? Am I just blending? And she brought all that to Dr. Dan Siegel. Now, Dr. Dan Siegel is a neuropsychiatrist and biologist who is thought of as a brainy doctor, does therapy, but he mostly teaches people about their brain and how to communicate better and live a better life. So he describes the brain as upstairs, downstairs. I talked the other day, and I've talked in many videos about how I have always thought of my brain as, because whenever I'm cooking, I think of it this way. My eyes are the 2 front burners on an oven, a stove top oven, and my 2 back burners are my ears. And my mouth would be the oven, and something baking would be in my head. Okay. And I'm always rotating around like a thought. Like I'm going to set that on a back burner and simmer it. I've tended to it as long as I can. Now I'll just let it simmer and stay warm. I definitely got to work on this over here. It's in the front right burner. Let me keep stirring it and adding to it. Okay, I can move it to the back burner here, right? Okay, I'm just going to put this in the oven as it is, and I don't have to look at it for a while. Okay, so I mean, we all do different things. That's how I have always arranged rhetoric in my head. But I think this book speaks so well to the thought that not only can there be an upstairs downstairs brain, or like a half, like he shows his hand like this to show what a brain looks like, top half, bottom half. If you learn about your brain in that way, or the way we did with DID MPD, that we have compartmentalized like a pie or like a computer chip, and we're defrogging all the time and then solidifying, or uploading, downloading, or there are programs running behind programs that we can't see. That is the way it was described back in the day. Dr. Dan Siegel has got an upstairs, downstairs brain. What he also teaches people is that they have alter egos, but it goes one step further. Well, first of all, in the book, Sally speaks about she was drawn to Sybil. She didn't know why. So she talks about her mom, who she calls Ba. She says, as her mom was dying, she finally reached out for help because she was falling apart too. Like as her mom was dying, she was feeling real empath. She was feeling the chest pain her mom was having. She was feeling the pain her mom was having. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She was feeling her mother dying. Oddly, right after that, she finally gets hungry and then starts eating a lot. And in eating, she is stuffing her emotions. Because there's something she wanted to say to her mom, she just didn't. There's other pieces of her that had stuff to say that she couldn't get in touch with, is what she's saying. So I don't want to give away the whole book, but I'm going to read a little bit. And when I felt like I was going down for the count, this is page 374. Okay, wait a minute, let me start with I'd sit in my bed or on the floor of my room, unable to breathe. Ba, it's her mother, in the ongoing battle for her life, was downstairs swimming in the pool, while I was upstairs drowning in nothing, feeling panicked and futureless, as if I were the one dying. So her mother was dying, but she was feeling all of it. And when I felt like I was going down for the count, I finally reached out for help. Dr. Dan Siegel quietly led me into his glass-filled office, then sat in a straight back chair, while I sat on the sofa across from him with my heart pounding. After a moment of stillness, he gently asked what had brought me there. This is common. What brings you to therapy? Slowly, I started telling him about my life, dribbling out until it became an emotional flood, as if I had been storing everything up, waiting for this one moment. I relived memories, episodes, and events that had happened long ago, but which now felt fresh and scabless. One day after we'd met a handful of times, because it only takes several times. It takes several times for a doctor to follow a patient, client, participant's lead. It takes several times for a patient, client, participant to have enough trust in a doctor and realize, a clinician, and realize they're believing me, they're listening to me, they're not interrupting me, they really get it. So they're going to now be the expert. That's all I'm going to say. One day after we'd met a handful of times, Dan asked me in a casual tone if I could name all the different parts of myself. Parts or fragments or aspects or personalities, whatever feels right to you, he continued. So Sally was saying, I am in pieces. I am scattered all around. I've led such a busy life from 4 years old. I can see myself as a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old. I could see myself fighting for that role. I could see myself in that role. I could see myself being that person I played. I could see myself as that character. I kept parts of that self. I still am that person. And Sally answered, I call them pieces. No one had seen me like that before as being a divided person. So this was special. And at the time, I hadn't yet begun to see it clearly myself. But as if it were a question I'd answered before, I immediately, without hesitation, named all the pieces of who I am. From incident to incident in my life, I could name the parts of me that had been most present, and if any others were involved. Little by little, memory by memory, I could see it. I could feel the system of behavior. And she uses this term a lot because Dan does. Dr. Dan does. System of behavior. Now, Dr. Phil talked about this, but nobody really wanted to hear it, where he talked about it's a learned system of behavior. Okay. Sally Fields, not Sally Jesse, I keep wanting to say that. Sally Fields goes to great length not to say multiple personality or DID or dissociative identity disorder, although throughout the entire book she describes panic, dissociative features like derealization, depersonalization, spacing out, and even body dysmorphia. She all of it. Okay. I'm gonna get back there. System of behavior. I could see it, could feel the system of behavior, the cooperation and the alienation between the members of my interior family. Now remember, when you're in therapy for MPD, DID, your doctor is looking for your internal map system, your interior. We're not talking about a happy place. What is your inner world internally in your personality? Where is everyone? What's going on in there? Okay? This is what she's talking about with her interior. Family. Interior family. It was something that I had known instinctively, but never pulled into the front of my awareness, and certainly never articulated. The powerful, elusive madwoman who had always frightened me, and the deeply sad ragamuffin who had fueled much of my work, but whom I despised and would banish from my mind, except from acting. Then there were the easy ones, the red rage of fire, the reliable rock, and Airy, the entertainer. Dan urged me to talk to each of them, to visualize them in my brain like they were separate people, and as if I were playing a game of Red Rover, to finally call each one over to allow them to join the group. And me. It was a version of the very scene I had played in Sybil. But this couldn't be the reason I felt so frantic, so panicked and frightened. I'd been like this all my life. Okay, so she goes on to talk about all the scripts she had in front of her, the Lincoln Project, and Mary Todd, and being on Brothers and Sisters. Okay, and then comes back to Dr. Dan. During one of my sessions with Dr. Dan, he asked if he could show me the still face experiment, a short video made by Dr. Edward Tronick and in his developmental psychology team. The film shows a 9 or 10-month-old baby sitting in a high chair, open-faced and gleefully fixed onto the eyes of her mother, seated before her. The baby is pre-verbal, but clearly communicating back and forth in a joyous conversation of love with her responsive, playful parent. The mother is then told to turn her head away for a moment, and when she turns back, it is with a blank, lifeless expression, no longer responding in any way. The baby is immediately affected, confused as to why her mother is not reacting, becoming anxious as she tries to reestablish the attachment. At first babbling, then reaching out, then screeching with alarm, till finally the baby turns away, trying to escape from the discomfort and starts to cry. If the mother still does not hear her distress, she begins to chew on her own hand, hoping to soothe herself. Then, after a few minutes, which seems like an hour for both the viewer and no doubt the baby, the mother too, the mother comes back to life and the connection is reestablished. The bad is gone and the good returns. And if done with loving support, this process can help the baby build inner reliance. You got to step away and be in that discomfort to get to the reliance, all right? It is a powerful and moving study of a child's need to have an attentive parental connection and the hardwired reaction of that baby when the attachment is lost for a short time. But, I protested, parents and caretakers have to look away periodically. They're human beings. And my mother was there, always caring for me or making sure I was with someone who would, my grandmother, my brother. Ba was wonderful and loving. I kept declaring, I'm here because I don't know how I'd live without her. Not to tear her down, she has been my life. Dan listened while I repeatedly told him he had it all wrong, nodding his head with acceptance until he sat quiet for a moment thinking. A child instinctively knows that it cannot survive alone, he told me a few days later, and I wanted to say, no shit. He continued with a be patient look on his face. But if their survival is dependent on someone who might be dangerous or deeply flawed, then the knowledge of that is too terrifying to accept. So the child creates a better scenario. Even though I was tapping one foot against the other, giving off the appearance of being bored to death, he began speaking now for the imaginary child. The problem can't be my mother's fault because I can't live without her, so it must be mine. My mother is already perfect. She has to be, and I am not. I can fix me. I can make myself better. I stopped moving, and something popped out of my mouth before my brain had formed the words. I'm going to say that again, what I just said. The problem can't be my mother's fault because I can't live without her, so it must be mine. My mother is already perfect. She has to be, and I am not. I can fix me. I can make myself better. So first the child tries to make themselves better before going on and making themselves better by recreating another self. I stopped moving and something popped out of my mouth before my brain had formed the words. Stunned by what I'd revealed, I sat with my mouth wide open, astounded and horrified. Had this never registered before, never penetrated my brain until this moment? When I got home, I pulled out my many journals, filled containers, and sitting on the floor, I went through the books until I found it. A day only 5 years earlier, one of the many days I'd spent packing to move out of the Brentwood house, I glanced at the journals to verify that it had indeed happened. I had written it down for God's sake. I had never let the thought register my mind. And this spoke to me because it's written on my birthday, May 15th. May 15th, 2004. Mother told me the most amazing thing yesterday. I was packing, talking about, I don't know, feeling remote, slightly perturbed, the way I do often with my mother. Sometimes I can break through, can be with her, but mostly I stay remote, in a place where she can't reach me, and she keeps trying. She finally caught my attention when she said something about always fighting with Jocko. That is her stepfather who molested her. I looked in her face and asked if she ever really fought with him. Yes, she said, if alcohol was involved. I laughed. She said she would let out all of her anger then, and it was mostly about me. I felt jabbed with a long hat pin. When I was a teenager and no longer speaking to him, he once accused me of being the reason his marriage was such a mess. But Ba had never told me that, and I was the cause for their fights. Had she? I wanted to be quiet, didn't want to talk at all, but we sat there in silence without thinking. I asked, what were you fighting about me about? For what he did to you. So her mother knew what was going on. For what he did to you, she said simply. The world slammed to a stop. I stuttered something like, but I didn't tell you. Not really. And when she said, he told me, I kept packing but felt dizzy. Calmly, she continued, he told me how he had suffered for what he had done. He wanted my sympathy, for me to know how hard it had been on him. Of course, I was appalled and knew it was the end of us. I couldn't look at her. My hands were shaking. If he admitted it, then why did you and Princess treat me like I made it up? It's because she did tell her mother, but her mother didn't say anything. I tried to tell you both once, remember? When I was doing the nun? I know, she said. I told Princess the truth. I tried to talk to you. I think I tried. I don't know. At first I felt a wave of relief and gratitude that she had tried, but something felt wrong. I don't understand. I still don't understand. Okay. So then she goes on to write, my cherished mother had known something, something. What exactly that was, I didn't want to hear it, because even at that time, when I was middle-aged, I couldn't bear the idea that she hadn't run to my side, that she hadn't come to get me. Even now, as I write this, I remember the wave of fear that rolled through me. I had spent my life hanging on to this vision of her being a glowing treasure, who loved me, that I was worth loving and protecting, and if I lost her, what would I have? Even as she was dying, I fought to keep that vision safe, but in doing so, I was losing myself. I was the one who had kept me safe. All of me, including the parts I found unlovable. They had protected me, had steered me outside of my fears, pushing me towards things I didn't feel capable of doing. Suddenly something lit up, as if I was standing in a dark room. I realized I was holding a lantern, and all I needed to do was turn it on. Light filled my head. I saw the childhood illusion I had fought so hard. I had accepted the idea I was broken in an effort to keep my mother whole. Always battling with a part of myself that expected to be knocked out, the buzzing voice that had come out of nowhere and grown over the years. telling me to duck even before life took a swing. Lincoln wasn't lost, not yet, not until it had actually been taken from me. She had been battling for the role. Steven Spielberg had told her, "You got this," and then told her, "I don't think it'll work." She fought for that role. So she goes on in this to continue to talk about Dr. Dan, and I don't want to give away the whole thing. But then she talks about Daniel Day-Lewis and Steven Spielberg and the amount of method acting that was needed for Mary Todd Lincoln, Molly, as President Lincoln called her, with such love and honor, that she was thought the bad one, she was despised, and yet she made Abraham Lincoln everything he was. So the book really kind of rallies around the thought that Sally Field was in all these pieces, and Dr. Dan Siegel helped her to name the pieces, and what she called pieces. He asked her to name names to invite into the office to do therapy with them, to invite into her life in a group with her, with others, all of them together, and to live. And that's how she became whole. And they're still with her. She goes more in detail in interviews where she talks about having one with her named Aaron. And one that is Gidget. Gidget is still very with her. So that goes to the weight of like method acting, how these characters can get like under your skin and stay in your persona. So when I heard Will Smith say, Richard Williams defending his family and whoa, my family, and he guessed he picked up some of that. I wanted to use that as an example because since 2009, I've been talking about that. When child actors and actresses and actors are continuing to play roles, method acting, Marilyn Monroe did it. Lee Strasberg was Sally Field's early helper in helping her to go places in her mind. Other thing is, she journaled from a young child, but never really read later what she had journaled. So a lot of times went back to her journal and was like, who wrote that? And I think we can all relate a little bit to that if you've been diagnosed with dissociative disorders or DID. You maybe have found some cards, letters, unsent, journals that are not even in your handwriting, and yet it fills in the blanks. But it also speaks to how doctors can so easily suggest, once they've met with you, they will follow your lead and then just make the suggestion and then continue to follow your lead, make another suggestion. So it really is a subtle little dance that a therapist and a client does. And I wanted to speak to that because that might explain the behavior system that Dr. Phil was talking about when he talked about MPD, DID, and how doctors are teaching their patients to behave in a system of understanding their personality as being all scattered in pieces and actually making personalities and names. And I believe it is the making of multiple personality. That is what it is. And it's subtle. It's suggested so subtly, and then you already know it when you go into a therapist. And Sally Field was saying, even when she was doing the movie, she talks a lot about when she was doing Sybil, how it was resonating with her, and how she knew to go. Even the script, the original director quit because he felt it was getting too emotional and he couldn't deal with it. He didn't believe in therapy. They got another one in, plus Lee Strasberg. So she was going places in her own head and attributing that to the motion picture for Sybil. She was given just a very sketchy idea of what had happened to Shirley Ardell Mason. She had met with Dr. Cornelia Wilbur. She had met with Flora Schreiber. She had met with everyone. And she also, I think she was privy to some of the tapes, is what she said. She was privy to some of the session work to understand it. But she drew on her own trauma and took on roles that actually were with her and assigned it to the movie. Okay, so very interesting stuff. It's a really good read, and it came out in 2018 and was, a lot of people were like, oh, is Sally Jesse, I keep saying Sally Jesse, I don't know, Sally Jesse Raphael is on my mind. I keep saying that. That's weird. Sally Field really tears apart her personality, puts it back together again, and looks at every role and asks the question, who am I? And who am I without my mother? And why did my mother allow my stepfather to abuse her? And there are claims she makes about Hollywood people that have said, no, that's not true. But this was one she could define by, albeit it's her journal and it's her saying her mother knew, but I think it's really important because so many people talk about how the creation of DID MPD can be made in therapy, and it can be. And if we look at people like Dr. Dan Siegel, who are saying, okay, you feel like your life is in pieces. When she went into therapy, she said, I feel like my life is in pieces. And he said, can you name the pieces? Or personalities, or aspects, or alters, or parts, whatever you prefer. And she said, pieces. I like to say pieces. Okay. So I wanted to make that video. That's it. That's all I got for today. If you hung in, just get the book and enjoy it. And have a nice day. Thanks for watching the video. Bye-bye.